Hello everyone, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies, and we are just about ready to start our webinar today focusing on profitability through scheduling and OnPlan. Now we do have a lot of attendees joining us today and we've got plenty of content to cover, but before we get started, and while we're making sure that everybody gets logged in properly, I'd like it if all of you would take a moment to look at the GoToWebinar panel. Find the area on the GoToWebinar panel marked Questions, and tell us a little bit about yourselves, your style of construction that you guys work on with your companies and your position in those companies. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you guys about what you would like to see in our webinar today. Now again, we're talking about scheduling almost exclusively, and we'll be focusing on some of those profitability points. But if you guys have anything that you'd like us to highlight or cover, please take a moment, share that with us now, and we're going to pause before getting started to make sure that everybody gets registered for the event today. So give us 2 minutes and we'll be back with you guys. Thanks for your patience. All right, thanks again for your patience, everyone. Once again, my name is Ian Schaefer, and I will be your product specialist today, taking us through the scheduling system in ConstructionSuite Desktop. Now, I also have with me my colleague Jordan Davis. He's one of our product specialists here as well. He's going to help kind of field some of the questions that we get regularly about scheduling or tie-ins to some of the financials. And I also have my colleague Sydney Dorsey, who's going to be answering a lot of questions for us today. So hopefully, if you guys are throwing those questions in through that questions panel in GoToWebinar, she'll be able to take those out. She's also going to be kind enough to flag any of the good ones so that we can go over those in the webinar. Now, of course, today, as we're going through this, we've allotted maybe 30 minutes to an hour for the webinar today. There are going to be some questions that we receive that I probably won't touch on in the webinar directly. Usually this is the series of questions that are kind of company specific or sensitive information perhaps. So if we don't answer your questions, stick with us or bear with us because we want to cover everything. We might just prefer to do that on a one-on-one basis after the fact. Now for now though, we're going to be going in to take a look at ConstructionSuite and some of the scheduling features that'll really help you guys make tons and tons of money and maintain profitable projects throughout the duration of your tenure with your companies. Now to begin with, a little bit of background on what we're going to be touching on today. Last week, of course, with the estimating webinar, we took a look at ConstructionSuite and some of the estimating features in the program for putting together good, well-structured estimates that included plenty of markups and margins to cover your cost of doing business and the profit that you're shooting for on any of these jobs. Now, of course, with that work that you've invested in the estimates themselves, you're putting together a lot of detail and some great structure. And if you guys are like a lot of our users, you may be basing this structure, or basing your estimates, on some of the great templates that we've made available for the past 15 or 20 years. Now, you'll find most of those estimating templates over on the left sidebar in the Estimating tab. And in that Estimating tab, you'll find templates that cover just about every style of work. We've got estimating templates in place for commercial work. We've got commercial and light commercial master templates, CSI 16 and 50. Residential, of course, residential master templates, remodeling master templates. We've even got several for specialty trades like electrical, plumbing, HVAC or other mechanical. We've also got landscaping and things like that as well. These are all designed to be a starting point for your estimating process. And if you'll remember from last week, we took I believe it was the residential template, built out a custom home, put it together in the Cargan residence, and I actually have that estimate open today, and we'll be using that as our launching point. Now with ConstructionSuite, of course, we've had the program available now for about 12 years, I believe. The first version was released in late 2006, and it's been immensely popular since then. But we've seen a lot of evolution in the program, growing up, I'll call it. And in the past 12 years, we've established a lot of excellent practices for you and your teams, and we've kind of refined the ones that we've offered to make sure that we cover a lot of the need. Now, of course, everybody has a need to get their jobs done in a timely manner. We find that for most of the contracts that we're working on, of course, if you can pretty accurately predict how long these jobs are going to take and keep everything moving along at a good pace, then you're pretty much guaranteed to make some pretty decent returns on those projects. And along those lines, today we're actually going to be starting from these estimates as well, because the estimate has an option that's fairly unique to the UDA platform. And in the estimate itself from the file menu, there's an option to actually create schedules using the estimate as an outline, a guideline for this. Now, of course, with ConstructionSuite, you do have a lot of scheduling templates available as well. I'm going to choose to use this option today just because this gives us a clean starting point for everything that we're working with. So to begin with, again, any estimates that you guys have been working on, just open up those estimates, go into the File menu, and take a look for the Create New Schedule button. Of course, this is going to be available for any version of any Construction Suite versions, Premiere or Catalyst and above, as those are the first versions that include both estimating and scheduling. But when you use this option, it's going to give you a number of great selections to make based on how you want to organize your estimate. Now, of course, in this case, I'm using the estimate as a framework for my schedule. I would like to see in my schedule a section or a group of tasks for general conditions, and then a group of tasks for my foundation, and a group of tasks for framing, and so on, following all of the major categories for work on this estimate. Now, in my case, I don't need the subcategories that don't have a value. We've already estimated out everything here, so everything that has a value is work that we're going to do, and those are the only things that I want to see in my schedule. We also have options to include options. I'm not going to use this today. I'm going to try to keep it simple, but I am going to include the company overhead and margin, and I'd like to prorate it into everything, just to make sure that it's spread out. As we're going through and working with the schedule itself, I'd like to be able to track where the money is either showing up or being spent on this project. And an easy way to do that is to make sure that we've got all the money embedded in the schedule itself. This will help with that. Now, I'd also like to skip over including the items, and I'm not going to filter down to a specific classification. Some of you might like the idea of filtering it down to just labor, or if you're working exclusively with subcontractors, maybe just subcontractor work. I like to actually track the material deliveries on the job as well, so I'm going to keep all of my material orders in place and just tie those into the labor items that we're going to see showing up in that schedule, the labor tasks. And so this, for me, is my perfect set of settings. Now, in this case, all we need to do is click OK, and it'll actually take all the information again from the schedule or from the estimate itself and build it into an OnPlan schedule. This is our starting point, or our launching board for this. This is going to give us all the information that we need in the schedule to start building out our time frame. Again, for me, this is where the whole thing starts, and once we get this done, we're not going to have to spend any additional time creating groups or tasks, or even, for the most part, adding resources. All of that information is being taken from the estimate and passed directly into the schedule to save you time. Now, at this point, we only have a few steps remaining to build out this schedule. Now, we're going to go through these steps a few times, obviously, because the options that we're looking for in this case will be adjusting durations and assigning predecessors for everything that we do. Now, for those of you who have worked with Gantt chart scheduling systems before, you're probably familiar with this process. The idea with the predecessor relationships here is we're just basically saying what comes after what, or how these tasks relate to one another. It's very important to assign these predecessor relationships in your schedule. This is what allows you to go through and change one or two tasks and have the entire schedule adjust accordingly to make up for those small delays or faster finish times. So again, predecessor relationships in this case are critical for making sure that everything comes together right. And of course, when you're assigning your durations, you always want to make sure that you get the duration as close to clean as possible. You don't want to try to build in too much wiggle room. Yes, you might have some guys that are a little slower to finish, or maybe you want to build in a little extra time because one of your team members doesn't always show up and you want to make sure that the customer has the right expectation. Again, we're talking about profitability today, so I'm going to throw that out the window. I don't accept any delays or built-in lag time or anything like that. I don't want to try to account for my guys being slow or lazy or anything like that. My customers don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. So I'm not going to include it, at least not yet. We could talk about that in a couple of moments. But again, first and foremost, we're going to be looking for predecessor relationships. Now, as you're building your predecessor relationships, most of these relationships are going to tie into your task's ID, the ID number that you're looking at over on the Gantt chart. It's on the far left side. It's this whole column of task numbers. And as you're going through and working with these, all you need to do is click into the predecessor column and assign a predecessor ID. Most of this is going to be pretty simple. The predecessor, for example, for me in this case, design comes first. After design, I'm going to go order all my permits. Maybe then we'll pay for the lot cost. And perhaps while we're doing lot cost, we'll also do construction financing. So same predecessor relationship in this case. Now again, I'm just putting in the predecessor ID. This is going to use the default predecessor relationship type of finish to start. You can also do the same thing by putting FS into the predecessor column as well. So for example, in this case, if we wanted to finish financing before we start site work, you would say 5's finish is when we start the next task. And it's represented by 5 finish to start. Now again, it didn't show up in this case because that's the default. Now if you want to see it, you could always go into and add some additional time frame. Maybe add in some lag time or a lead time by doing plus or minus so many working days. In this case, I'm saying 8's finish is when I can start footer's labor, but I want to wait an extra day. So now, oh, sorry, not 8, 7. Good catch, Jordan. 7's finish is when I want to start plus 1 day. Can't have a 1 day delay on myself. That doesn't really work out so well. Now again, in this case, what that does is, over on the Gantt chart, it's going to build in a 1 day gap between finishing my side work and adding in my footer's labor. Now again, this might be a time frame where we want to give the maybe land time to settle perhaps, or maybe in this case we know we need to have somebody come in for an inspection. So inspection's not something that you would typically have on the estimate. So in our case, we're going to right click, add in an additional task. There it is. And this task is going to be for a site inspection. Now because it is an inspection, maybe I want to move this up under site work. So we're going to right click and move it up. We also don't need much time, so I'm going to change it from a full task to a milestone by changing the duration from 1 day to 0 days. We're also going to make this dependent on site work. So in this case, again, predecessor relationship is going to be task ID 7. And now I want to change footer's labor so that it doesn't start until after the site inspection is finished. So we can get rid of this 1 day lag and now connect it into the site inspection instead. Now 8 is the correct value. Now we can move on with that. And that builds in that small site inspection so that we can make sure that we're getting everything done in order. Now as you move forward from there, if we do have footer's materials that we need to order for my footer's labor, you've got 2 ways that you can set this predecessor relationship. Now in my case, I want the labor to always happen as soon as it can. This is one of the ways that I can kind of control how everything happens with the schedule. If my guys are always doing the work just as soon as they can do the work, then I have to make sure that the materials show up in time. So instead of making the materials the determining factor for when the work starts, I'm leaving the work as the determining factor. My materials are going to have a predecessor relationship of 9's start is when we have to be finished receiving the footer's materials. So it's a different style of relationship, almost the reverse style, where now I have to be done with this task before its predecessor can begin. Or before its predecessor does begin, rather, not before it can. This means that if footer's labor gets delayed, footer's materials can be ordered or show up on site at a later date, and it all just keeps in line. Now again, as we continue down this course, you'll be setting additional predecessor relationships, again, connecting all of these various different tasks together in a way that allows us to map out the job in a clean way. Again, focusing primarily on making sure that everything happens when it can. We want to try to squeeze as much time out of this schedule as possible. The owner of our company was actually sharing a story with us about some of the townhomes that he used to build. No, it wasn't townhomes. What was it, Jordan?
I'm pretty sure it was just duplexes, this story.
Duplexes. Yeah, and what he found is he was able to complete the duplexes, most of them, in 68 days, if he started everything and finished it immediately. And the first couple that he did, he finished them, he set the schedule, 68 days, roughly, thereabouts. But as time went on, as they built more and more of these things, and he had to share some of the scheduling load, what he found is that the time frame to build the job got longer and longer as they accounted more and more for things like weather delays, or I think some of the guys would show up consistently late, and they would build that into the schedule. Eventually it went from being around 2 months to being 6 months for one of those projects. Now again, if we're going to maintain profitability, then we cannot do that. Our focus in the schedule itself is to make sure that all of these are connected as closely as possible so that we don't build in delays. We don't assume that there will be points of failure in here. We try to account for anything that might happen by just having better teams or better communication perhaps. So again, big part of this is making sure that we get all of these tasks connected. Now I'm going to go ahead and set some predecessor relationships for everything else. This is going to come into play later, and what I'm doing is I'm just going through and selecting all of the remaining tasks, and I'm going to use one of the built-in features that Jordan asked me to actually talk about in the meeting today. There's an additional feature in here that most people don't talk about called sequential predecessors. And if you're working with several tasks that fall in like in a given section and they all depend on one another, you can select several tasks and use this option for setting sequential predecessors, and it literally just daisy chains everything together. This comes after this, comes after this, comes after this. Now as you go down further and further again, you'll notice that it is assigning one after the other after the other. We'll do this for the purposes of cash flow, which we're going to be talking about here in just a couple of moments. But focusing here at the top, we've still got a lot of these tasks, and they're still starting pretty closely together. Now that we've got the predecessor relationships, though, the next most important thing is assigning durations. We all know that the architect isn't going to finish the designs in a day. This is not going to happen. Perhaps we give them 4 days and let them come up with something there. Now that might still be unrealistic, but conveniently, this is a fake job, so we can be a little unrealistic. In your case, your team is going to kind of dictate how this is going to work. If you know that your designers are going to be able to get everything done in a week, assign it for 5 working days. If you think that it's going to take 2 weeks, again, 10 working days. And you'll notice that it is skipping over weekends and holidays as well, so you don't have to try to account for weekends. Just keep pressing them forward as you go. Now again, permitting, we'll go ahead and say that the permits are going to take 3 days. Lot costs, that might only take a day, and let's say for financing, it's going to take 2 days. Then we can press on and start working with our site work. I'll give my guys 2 weeks for all the site work. The inspection is still going to take no time. For footers labor, again, we'll say 3 or 4 days. The material delivery, again, I want to have it on site by the 14th of August now so that my guys can start on the 15th. Just to make sure that we don't forget about this, you can right-click and go to the task information to assign reminders. Now, the reminders within the task are just going to be sending out emails or text messages or giving you pop-up notifications, and it's all going to tie back into the task itself. So setting these reminders is an easy way to make sure that you get the orders done in time. And these reminders should probably be set up, especially for the material orders, well in advance of when you need them. Perhaps setting up a couple of additional reminders to make sure that they're getting out around the time that you need to place the order. So again, we don't have any lapses in schedule because of these delays. So assigning the reminders in here is a great way to make sure that the information gets set up. And as you start to build out the additional detail for your schedule, don't forget to save it into the job, and then it becomes a primary part of this project.
Ian, while you're saving the schedule here, you mentioned before we actually created the schedule, and we just saw it there on the Save As menu. How is this setup different from, say, a schedule template?
Well, that's a great question, Jordan, because as we saw, there's 2 primary options for generating these schedules. You can generate the schedule from a template, and from the template, you're going to have all the tasks that you would typically need, and generally you're going to have everything interconnected. All the predecessors will be there, and the tasks will be there, and everything kind of lines up. Creating it from the estimate doesn't provide those predecessor relationships, but it does give you a lot of the pricing information and the resources, in addition to, again, the groups and tasks and everything else like that. So your trade-off is, in essence, one has all of the tasks connected, the other preloads all of the dollar amounts and resources. Now, of course, we do have the option up at the top to sync with your estimate. And if your schedule is set up in the same way as your estimate templates are, and the 2 actually share a lot of common components, the template might be a great solution for you here as well. In that case, after you generate your schedule using your template, just come back into it after the fact and sync it with your estimate again, and you'll have everything that you need. So again, great question, and both actually work out really, really well. So if that's the case, if you are doing the sync, then maybe the only time that we need creating a schedule from the estimate is perhaps if the job is rather unique, if it's a one-off. So this just makes it a little easier in that case. Now again, as we spend time working on putting these things together, again, you're going to see two primary pieces of information getting carried into the schedule from the estimate, regardless of how you build it. Could be synced, could be built from scratch using the estimate as a framework. But the two primary pieces of information are going to show up over on the Gantt chart. You'll see one of them is going to be the prices for everything that we did. The other, potentially, will be the resources that were assigned. Now, if you hover over the task, you get a little bit more information about this as well. So regardless of how you display it on the Gantt chart, from here you can actually see that we don't have a resource assigned to design services, but we may have resources assigned elsewhere. Now, an easy way to go ahead and assign these resources is to right-click on your tasks and to set resources here. Now, as you're setting the resources, of course, on the Resources tab, you can add a new resource, and you can go through and assign the people to these tasks based on a number of different factors. Perhaps we're just going to go through and look at our recent list to see who we've been assigning to various different tasks, again, recently. Maybe we're going to go through and check the groupings for something like an architect or a designer for this particular section. Now, as you do go through and assign these, you'll notice that it is going to give you little pop-up notifications regarding tasks or regarding the people that you guys have set up. For those of us who have insurance tracking as part of the ConstructionSuite software, this is one of the areas where it's going to start to trigger these things. For example, Henderson Design and Associates doesn't have any insurance or certificates or licensing. The system just notified us that it may not be the best person to use in this case because, well, we don't know if they're actually licensed to do any of the work that they do, and we don't know what kind of results that we'll get. This is especially applicable later when we start trying to bring in groups like roofers. If we're going to accept responsibility or liability for the roofing company, we want to make sure that they have workman's comp and liability so that if they're not insured, we don't get hit by the $50,000 bill come audit season from the insurance company.
Yeah, good luck staying profitable on your job when something like that comes your way.
Yeah, that's usually when we're talking to clients who are just coming to us, who are trying to build their way out of a hole. Now, we've seen that happen far too many times. So again, in this case, if you get those pop-ups, take action to resolve the missing insurance. Don't just ignore the pop-ups. If you can, like I have done, make sure that you get all your documentation together for it.
Ian, I wanted to chime in and ask another question. We're assigning resources right now. Is there a way to see if that person or group is actually free for that time period where we're assigning them?
Again, excellent question in this case, and I'm actually going to assign somebody to all of Foundation in this case so that we can take a look at that. So right now, I've highlighted all of the group in Foundation, and we're going to have, let's say, a concrete subcontractor coming out and providing most of this. Most of it. Maybe not all, but most. So in this case, we're going to go through and we're going to select all the tasks. Again, I'm using Control-click or Shift-click in order to get the right tasks. And right-click on it and then go to Set Resource. Now from here, to answer your question directly, when we add a new resource, again, we can go through the grouping options, or I happen to know in this case that the guys that we want are in the C's, so we can get to them pretty quickly. We're going to take a look at City Concrete. Did I pass them? Yes, I did. And this is going to give us a rough idea on who we're looking at and whether or not we want to use this team. Now, City Concrete has a fair amount of guys that they can send out to our job site to do the work. And to get a rough idea on how available they're going to be, we can take a look down in the bottom right-hand corner where we can see all the scheduled activities for City Concrete. Now, when you're looking at this, if you click on any of the days in red, these red days are the days that they are not available. So when you click on one of these, it actually shows you what they're working on, which project it's associated with, and just gives you a better idea on whether or not they're going to be able to jump back and forth between these jobs. So here, if we're looking at a project at Lot 187 Baldwin Park, that might be clear across town, so it might not be the best idea to get these guys assigned in this time frame. But if we're looking to plug them in somewhere around the middle of August, and they're working at some other position, maybe it's fine. So again, in this case, we can make that judgment call based on what we see here. And as we're looking through it, again, you can select somebody else if you need to. If these guys are going to be too busy, you can always come back into the list and look for someone else to see what kind of availability they have. Or again, if we're grouping, in this case for foundation work, maybe we come in and take a look under concrete supply or concrete subcontractors or something like that. We might even have them under foundation, but this is generally where the contact grouping really helps. You'll see the groups here, so group your subs, find the right guy or team, and go ahead and assign them here so that we can continue pressing on. Now again, keep in mind too, when you are assigning your team, there are still spaces in here to assign reminders for anything that you guys are working on. As a quick and easy solution, when you're putting these tasks together, you can right-click on the task and set reminders from the task information just to send out emails or text messages to the team who will be involved in the project to make sure that they get there in time. We actually have 3 different types of reminders predefined in the system, planning for about 2 weeks prior, 10 calendar days prior, starting, which is a couple of days before, and custom reminders for the day before, again, available via text or email, however you'd like to send them. Now all this information then goes out, and as you're putting the information together, again, setting those reminders tends to be key. Now, I don't know if most of you have caught this before, but if you do take a look at the reminder messages that we provide by default, you'll actually notice that some of the information in those reminder messages looks a little, shall we say, strange, where we have things like the activity name. This space, what we have between the braces here as subject, this is actually going to fill itself in when the notification goes out. And it's going to use the subject for the task that we have selected, footer's labor. Now we've set it up this way because, again, if you choose to preload all of the reminders into your template, as we were talking about earlier, all of the reminders are already there, ready and waiting to go out. All it needs is a schedule to be saved to the job as a primary schedule for the job. And then it'll start sending out all those reminders, updating as needed. This also means that later, if delays come into play, you can actually go through and affect those delays, and the reminders will automatically update themselves to send at the new, later date. So you can keep those things in line as well.
Ian, could you show us actually how you would update the schedule, maybe to show that there's been a delay in the schedule, or just to really communicate progress on the job so far? Is there an easy way to do that?
Absolutely. Now, one thing too, before we actually change anything, as we're building the schedule itself, don't forget you will need to save often. Just out of habit, you should do this. There's an autosave option, but I like to go up and just push the button to make sure that we've done it. There's also going to be additional options as well to set baselines. Now these baselines are going to be very important because as you're working through the schedule itself, you always want to know where you thought you were going to begin and shift into where the schedule has taken us, but always be able to go back and compare. Now, in order to do that comparison, we need an original copy or we need a carbon copy for when we started. And that's ultimately what the baseline is. Now, this schedule could be a living document. We're going to be going through and we're going to be adjusting percent complete. We're going to be moving tasks around. This is going to happen. But setting the baseline, especially setting the baseline as soon as we have what we think is a completed schedule, gives us that starting point. Now the schedule will remember where we began, and so when we go through and adjust tasks, let's say I'm going to make permits longer. What are you pointing at? Oh, just setting a different date? Yeah, we can do it that way. So we're going to just move it back, let's say, a week. So we're going to say this is going to start around 8/1, perhaps. And everything is going to auto-adjust over to the right. As you see this happening, you'll see where the baseline originally took effect. Now, the baseline does show up as an after image, a shadow, if you will. And this is where the carbon copy idea comes into play. Right now, we're showing the initial schedule. And with that initial schedule, you'll be able to go back and see where everything was supposed to just take place, even if now it's taking place at a later date. Some tasks might happen at the same time, but again, everything else will adjust accordingly. Now, as you're looking through this, again, you've got where it did start, you have where it is now starting. If you ever wanted to provide a comparison, especially for your customers, you can actually come up to the Reports menu and generate a baseline schedule report. This is going to show you the impact of a delay and how it's affected the schedule as you guys have worked through this. Now again, I say this because certain things are going to be shuffled around in different ways, especially when you start to get close to holidays. A task that would have been finished just before the holiday, which now overlaps the holiday, might take a week or two longer after a one-day delay. This can happen.
July the 4th.
Yeah, July the 4th might be a good example. Or as we get later and later on in the year, maybe we start to hit things like Thanksgiving. We plan to be done with this one particular task before Thanksgiving, but a game came right up against it. We missed a day, and now it happens a week and a half later. So it goes. But as you guys are building through this, again, you can show the impact of all of these delays. And for those of you who have in your contracts that you have to finish by a certain date, barring any client delays or it costs you money, this is a great way to track those client delays. If they miss selections or if they have something else that doesn't happen on time, set your baseline, make the adjustments, and then you guys can always go back and report on that. So if they say, you finished 3 days late, that cost you $3,000, you might turn around and say, well, as we mentioned to you earlier, you didn't make these 18 selections in time. This is the result of that delay. So again, documentation for everything, key. This is really important. And as you're going through and working with some of the additional options in here too, you can go to the View menu to show or hide various different columns on the task information side. Now, granted, in this case, if we're printing, you can also show or hide things on the Gantt chart as well. So this might be where you go to turn off the estimated dollar amounts. But more importantly, in this case, I'm going to turn on the % complete on the task info side so that we can go through and actually start to mark our progress. This is where you can go into these tasks and start to apply things like we're finished with design services, maybe we're done with permits as well, and maybe we're halfway done with the next 3 or 4 tasks. And so you can go through and start to mark these % completes as you go. You'll notice that the group auto-updates all of its own information based on the tasks underneath. So the duration comes from the total start date and end date for everything in there and figures out the number of days in between. It also auto-calculates its % complete based on the number of days of work that have finished since the group starts. So again, as you go through and you're working on this, you can actually fill in these numbers and get everything else correct in there too. Now I did just notice that one of the questions came up, is there a way to take the dollar values out of the schedule so that we don't display it by accident? And there's a couple of ways actually. One of those involves a special procedure for saving, but more importantly for me, since cash flow is going to be important for us later, rather than wiping those values out, I'm just going to scroll down to and turn off the total estimated value on the Gantt chart so that nobody sees it. This is especially useful if you're printing out schedules to hang on a job site. I know we try to make all of those things available elsewhere, but if you guys are printing or you're exporting as an image file or a PDF or whatever it might be, or even if you're exporting to...
Yeah, or showing people on a tablet.
Yeah, absolutely. Or showing people on a tablet if you're using something like the AWS cloud-hosted server and you guys happen to have a Surface with you. All of this would be available. You can turn off those dollar amounts by default. That way it's going to save, not accidentally show people these dollar amounts or anything like that, and it just shows up for you there. Now, as an added bonus, you'll also be able to take this schedule, by the way, while we're thinking about printing or sharing, you can also take this and save it to ConstructionOnline, which is an even better way to get the live information out there. Not only does this information then become accessible to the people on the job site who can see what they're supposed to be working on while they're on the job site, it'll also be updating and notifying them through systems like GamePlan or through the mobile app if they're using any of the ConstructionOnline features and functions on the ConstructionOnline app, or through the portal app if you guys have access to that. All of these kind of tools are going to be available to them so that they always know where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to work on. Now, again, in that situation, you've got to make sure that they get there. Reminders and notifications and the GamePlan function for ConstructionOnline are critical for this. If you guys aren't using those, take a look at them. They're huge, huge value points. But we do need to jump back to where we were.
Yeah, I want to jump back in. Speaking about value, I think that we've covered some great pieces in the schedule so far, but we've taken this schedule and built it off of our estimate. I'm really curious. Can you dig into the value of actually pulling the estimate information into the schedule now?
Absolutely. And that's actually going to lead into the next thing that we wanted to show, which is under the Reports menu, we have the all-important cash flow report. Now again, as you're working with schedules, of course, you're going to have your resources showing up on the job site, and you're going to have them assigned to the various different tasks on the schedule. And you're going to have the dollar amounts carried into this schedule from the estimate itself, so there should be a way to line these things up. You're getting the work done, you're paying people to do the work, or you're getting paid for the work that's getting done. With the cash flow report, you can start to track these trends. The idea with the cash flow report is you're taking the report, first of all, by project for this job, and running it to track the income or the outgoing expenses either on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, so twice a month, or monthly. Now I'm going to opt for the monthly option in this case. This is going to give us all of the information so that we can track how we're being paid. We're going to do monthly draws. Let's assume in this case that we're using the application for payment, so this should give us a rough idea at the beginning of the job what that payment schedule is going to look like throughout the course of the job. So if everything goes according to plan, our payment requests should look about as they show up here. Now in this case, we did include the company overhead margin as a prorated markup, so I want to make sure that I'm including markups and sales tax. I'm not going to use the option in this case to multiply costs by percent complete, because we're just going to go with a raw report. Now this report generates in Excel. You'll actually see it coming together as an Excel spreadsheet. And so when we open it, it's actually going to open as an Excel spreadsheet with all of the tasks down the left side, the dates and their costs along the bottom, and then in the middle you'll see that the dollar amounts are going to show up again based on the end of each of these tasks on the calendar itself, on the Gantt chart. Now the reason that we provide this in Excel is, of course, some of us have very big tasks that span multiple weeks or months. There it is. The value for this task down at the bottom is actually a sum of all of the things that show up in the columns above. So by providing this in a spreadsheet, we give you the opportunity to go in and adjust some of the dollar amounts. Maybe we're not doing all $90,000 in 1 month. Maybe we're going to split this in half. We'll do 50 and then 41.25. So 50,000 here, 41,250, and this automatically updates down at the bottom to reflect this better distribution of costs. Now again, as we're kind of going through and manipulating these numbers, you'll do that from time to time in various different sections. But it does give it to you in a spreadsheet like this, so you can provide it to anybody that you'd like. There's a number of different options as well in the cash flow report, so you can adjust some of those other options to get maybe a more condensed version of the cash flow report, or a better breakdown if you wanted to do it bi-weekly, since this one is pretty slim at the moment. Again, if we're using the monthly option in this case and we went back to that original duplex that our owner had built, this would only have 2 columns for the dollar amounts, maybe 3 if you started in a weird time. But again, in this case, you can pull the information in, you can provide it in the report anyway, and just choose what fits you best. Now the beauty of this too is not only do you have the ability to go through and generate these cash flows, but you can generate cash flows for a variety of different things. Now again, what I did in this one is I included all my markups and my dollar amounts and everything like that. So this is going to track all of my income. This might be very important for some of you, because as you're trying to figure out if you've got the income to cover all of the subcontractor payments, or if you need to figure out how you're going to be timing those payments to your subs, or paying bills for your vendors, this is a great way for you to track the future, the upcoming trends, to figure out how you're going to distribute payment to all of your subs. So again, as you guys are working through something like this is, for me, this is going to be the income report. If I wanted to see the expenditure report to see where I can expect all of those bills to come in, we might run the report again, maybe on a weekly basis without including the markups, to see where all the money's going out. And from there you can actually do a little bit of comparison. Again, it's just Excel, so you can actually copy and paste between them as well, and do some engineering with these numbers to make sure that everything makes sense. And this is one of the highest value points to working with the estimate. Again, if we don't have an idea initially how that money is going to be coming and going, then it's a little harder to project how these jobs are going to pan out after they're complete. Now we can't always wait until we're done with each of these jobs, but if we're waiting until we're done, then we're waiting to clean up messes until after the messes become catastrophic. And we don't want to do that. Again, we're talking about profitability. So planning is a big part of this, and providing details like a cash flow report to anybody who's going to be working with this is an excellent way to do that. Now, as I mentioned as well, this cash flow report is for a specific job. If we were only working one job, this might make sense. But almost none of us are only working one job. So if you'll notice when you're in the schedule itself and generate a new cash flow report, there's an option to filter it by a single project or uncheck the box to get all of the cash flow for all of your projects. Now this option is going to be available, assuming of course that all of our schedules are up to date and that we've got the dollar amounts in there. But if you're following what we've suggested so far, our recommendations to date, then this option is going to allow you to once again predict a lot of your cash flow for the next several months across all of your jobs. You'll be able to see all the bills coming in, or you'll be able to see all the income that's showing up on your jobs. So again, this option, this one tiny little checkbox, is the difference between making sure that a single job gets done in an intelligent way versus making sure that you're running your whole company to be a profitable enterprise. So again, one checkbox is all you need to include, or in this case, uncheck, in order to get that additional insight on how the company is going to be operating for the next several months. So you'll have these options available to you here. All of this, again, can be run in an Excel spreadsheet. If you choose not to save it into your jobs, that's fine. You can always run the cash flow report, save it to the desktop or something like that so that it doesn't end up in ConstructionSuite in case you don't want that information available. And again, it's a simple way for you to go through and calculate these values, though, to see where the money's going. Now, there's another option in here under financial reports for an earned value report. Where the cash flow report is looking forward, the earned value report is typically looking back. So this would be the earned value report is going to be based on not only the dollar amounts assigned to each of these tasks, but also the percentage complete for those as well. So it's going to show you where you finished these tasks and where the money should have come in. And if you ever need that as a comparison point as well, you can pull the earned value report and compare that maybe to your deposits and your bank statement. And just make sure that everything there lines up. It's a great way to go in and just catch where you might have forgotten to invoice a customer, or maybe you haven't received payment yet. So again, with that earned value report, you can use that as a guarantee that you're collecting in the right time, from the right people, with the right amounts. Again, 2 5-star reports available for you guys through the scheduling system here. And as you work with this, you'll be able to take some of this information, again, out of the ConstructionSuite system, which is traditionally a desktop platform, and make it available either via printout from the file menu. You'll have a ton of options to print these, to export to something like maybe Microsoft Project if you're sending it to a GC who uses Project and you're going to be working on a specific portion of the job. You can export to image files or PDFs to share with your customers, send it over to Kinko's so that they can print it out on a plotter. Or you can take this schedule and export it to Google Calendar as well. Now, if you've connected your Google Calendar, this is an excellent way to take this, push it up to Google Calendar where it will create its own calendar for the project, and then you can add in subscribers to that calendar, people who could go in there and maybe see what's happening with it. If at some point you have some updates to the schedule, you can always re-push it to Google Calendar and it'll overwrite whatever was there with the new tasks. If you're using this option, I recommend using Google Calendar as just a way to go in there and see it. Don't try to make updates because, of course, Google Calendar doesn't have predecessor relationships and they're not tracking all the resources or the percentage completes or anything like that. With these with the OnPlan scheduling, you've also got some of the advanced features like setting constraints for tasks where it can happen within this window but never later or earlier. So you can set these kind of time-bound constraints for your tasks as well. Again, Google Calendar shows up natively on your phone, has none of this Gantt chart scheduling capabilities. So again, we want to take advantage where we have them to make sure they're available. Now, if you do need access to this information in a mobile platform, again, best option available is going to be this to publish to ConstructionOnline. This actually takes the Gantt chart schedule here, makes it available in the ConstructionOnline scheduling platform, and gives you a lot of the same functionality here as you have, there as you have here, and it does share all the same information. It's a one-to-one comparison. So as you're making this information available, send a live version up to not to Google Calendar. Send a live version up to ConstructionOnline, and you can go online to modify any of your details and download copies if you ever need to. You can always keep the original schedule, and then back on the scheduling tab, there's an option to download any schedules that you'd like to get updated copies for back into ConstructionSuite. This is also a great way to have your live files and all your various different copies or iterations or anything like that. So again, excellent tools for going through and pulling the information or sharing the information. And don't forget, profitability means not making excuses or assuming failure. So as you're putting these schedules together, make sure that you try to keep everything as close together as possible, or as tight as you can keep it for those schedules. And if you ever need help, you'll also have some additional options here under the Tools menu to compress your schedules, which squeezes out all of that lag time that doesn't belong. Or you can set ASAP for your tasks as well. ASAP is a great way to have everything start as soon as it can and not allow for any unnecessary delays. ASAP just, it's as it sounds, everything starts as soon as possible. So you can't build in just extra lag time. If you try to drag something and create an unnecessary delay, it just squeezes it right back out again and forces you to start as early as you can. Word of warning in this one, it doesn't check your subcontractor's schedule to make sure that they're available in that time. So if you are using ASAP, you should also use the constraints if you can get an updated calendar from them. So just make sure that you don't end up setting them up for failure by assuming that they will be available as soon as you need them. Always check or provide those additional limitations in the system if you use it. Otherwise, I believe that's going to cover most of what we have for you today. So as you're working through the system, again, make sure that you get all of the details together to maintain a profitable company and take advantage of the tools that are there. In that case, some of those tools might actually be us, or Jordan specifically. So as you go through and work with the system, don't forget you can reach out to us at any time. Go to the ConstructionSuite interface, go up to the Tools menu, and, Help menu, you're right. And go to Contact Information. You'll find phone numbers, you'll find email addresses, and a number of other ways to reach us as well. So if you have any follow-up questions, or if there's anything that you guys would love to see in here again, reach out to us at any time. You'll find us here at our 800 number, 1-800-700-8321, or via email at any of these wonderful email addresses that you find in here, support, or services, or info, or all the rest of them. Yeah, so sales. They're all a great way to get back in touch with us. So as you guys are working through this, feel free to reach out to us anytime you like. Otherwise, don't forget, we will have another webinar this time next week. Next week we're going to be finishing up our profitability series. And if you have a chance, don't forget to join us Thursday, 3 o'clock Central. And we'll be able to take you guys through a number of those kind of final touches to make sure that you guys are making a killing out there and making all the money that you guys need to make and hitting all your targets as well. For now, though, guys, thanks once again for joining us. This is Ian and Jordan and Sydney, I guess, on the keyboards. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care.